Welcome back. Now we answer questions we receive from you, our viewers. If you have a question, visit our website, QuranSpeaks.com. Dr. Shabir, the question is, I thought in Islam you could have different views, different opinions, different interpretations. Is there such a thing as the ultimate view in Islam where every Muslim without fail must follow?
Yeah, so we can say that there are some things which are so very clear in the Quran or so clearly reported from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that we expect all Muslims to abide by that. And then there are some other things which are not so clear, or they're in texts which are perhaps of dubious authenticity when we come to look at, for example, some hadiths on a subject. What is common among Muslims? These beliefs have been, and practices have been almost universally accepted among Muslims in terms of beliefs that there is only one God. We believe in angels and the fact that God sent books, scriptures. He sent messengers along with the books and prophets more generally. We believe in that the last day, that there's going to be a reckoning for our deeds, and we believe in God's control of all affairs. So these are so well entrenched in the Quran and authentic hadith that we don't expect that Muslims are going to be differing over these matters. When it comes to practices, offering prayers, declaring faith to begin with, but that's almost taken for granted from what I already said. Declaring faith, which is referred to as shahada, and offering prayer or salah, giving charity or zakah, fasting in Ramadan, and performing hajj. These are practices that are so universally acclaimed among Muslims. They are referred to as pillars of Islam. So these are like central things in Islam. We don't expect that there's going to be a difference about these, except in the details of the practice, like how and when, to what extent, and so on. But then there are other things which I've already started hinting at the idea that there are going to be difference in details. Mm-hmm. So we all agree that we're going to pray, but when it comes to offering the prayer, there could be some slight differences among Muslims in interpreting some of the details of the prayer and so on.
Mm-hmm. What about if, there's a recognized kind of scholarly body of opinion, and then someone goes against that opinion? Would that person be considered outside of Islam?
No, they wouldn't be considered outside of Islam unless we're talking about something that is so central to the faith that on which we are not going to permit deviance. But on many aspects of Islam, there is ample room for interpretation. And while one scholarly body may rule one thing, another scholarly body may rule something very different. We've had great scholars in Islamic history who have ruled the opposite of each other. And that's quite acceptable in what we call the Ahlus Sunnah Wal Jama'ah, the people of the way of the Prophet, and the Jama'ah. The Jama'ah means basically the community, and this is an ecumenical term. It means that rather than excommunicate people, we are actually going to include people in a broad stream that we're calling the Jama'ah, or the congregation that is worldwide. It's a global nation, it's a global ummah, and in this global ummah we have many different shades of interpretations on a wide variety of matters.
So Dr. Shabir, you mentioned differences of opinion. How early did these differences arise, and how significant were they? What sort of differences of opinion were there that existed within the early Muslim communities?
Well, we can expect that within the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there were those who were devout towards him, and then there were those who were, flagging behind and looking for excuses and so on. So as for the people who were devout towards him, they would naturally take his explanations and follow his lead on almost everything, and there's no difference of opinion then. But soon after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, new questions arose and needed definitive answers definitive answers were needed for those, and people arrived at different opinions on various aspects. In fact, there is an incident reported from right within the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that will illustrate how people can have different opinions. It is mentioned that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sent out a delegation, and he told them that they should pray the late afternoon prayer at their destination. So they set out for the journey, and on the way, they realized that they're not going to reach the destination in time to offer that prayer within its usual time. So now a difference of opinion arose among them. Should we take the words of the Prophet literally and not pray until we get to the destination, in which case we'll pray late, but we will have followed his explicit order. And some others said, no, we should pray right here and now because this is the time for the prayer. And certainly the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not intend for us to delay the prayer beyond its time. He expected us to reach the destination in time for the prayer. So some prayed there and some prayed later when they reached the destination. Some took the spirit of the command and some took the literal wording. And in the end, when it was reported back to the Prophet, peace be upon him, that they had this difference and this is how they worked it out, the Prophet, peace be upon him, accepted both ways. So the report goes. But that report shows that there can be differences of opinion among Muslims because some things are not so clear. Some people may take it literally. Some people may take it figuratively, metaphorically. Some people may see the spirit behind it and apply it in a different way. But all of this variety is acceptable because what is not acceptable is for people to follow their own whims and desires, because then in that case, you're not interested in God's commandments. You're just interested in following your own.
And it's interesting in that story because, you know, these are people who were, you could tell they were motivated by their love of God and the Prophet Muhammad. It wasn't like they're just doing something randomly.
Exactly.
They're trying their best to follow God and follow the Prophet Muhammad, but then finding differences of opinion that arise just out of that love.
Exactly. Sometimes people just want to do the right thing, but whatever is the right thing is not so very clear anymore. And so we have to allow for this kind of variety because people are different. Some people are optimistic, some people are pessimistic. One person sees the same glass as being half full, the other person sees it as being half empty. So people look at things differently, they interpret things differently, and some things are genuinely obscure. And for God's good reasons, God could make everything as plain as daylight for everyone, and then there would be no difference of opinion. But then we would all be like robots, just simply following precisely what is laid out, and there will be no room for thought. God, in his wisdom, has given us this religion, which is almost like a peach that has a hard core, and then it has the fleshy part, which is soft, and then it even has a fuzzy outer layer, that the skin of peach. I don't know if you ever noticed that. It's fuzzy, right? As opposed to a nectarine, which is nice and smooth.
Yes.
So, I mean, this is God's creation. So some things can be hard and strict in the faith. Some things can be soft, like the flesh of the peach, and some things can be a little bit fuzzy, like the skin. But altogether, it forms a whole. And it's beautiful that way, because when there is that flexibility, when things are not so hard as the seed of the peach, then we have room to maneuver, to grow, and to apply our faith in changing and new circumstances.
Now, Dr. Shabir, earlier you mentioned whims and desires. So how does a scholar make sure that they're not following their whims and desires when making decisions?
It's not easy, because we're human beings. We are, blown about by the winds of change. We are in situations, sometimes we want to please people around us. Sometimes we feel the pressures of governments and other powers upon us. So there are all of these things. So what are the checks and balances? So we allow a scholar to speak and to give his or her evidence and proof for the positions that they arrive at. And then we weigh those evidences and proofs. And we try to bring counter evidence and counter proofs. And then in the end, through this whole process of scholarly interaction, in the literature especially, nowadays a lot of people are doing things on YouTube and so on, but that's not the scholarly realm. The scholarly realm traditionally has been on
right?
paper, yes. There are scholarly journals. They are peer-reviewed by other scholars who have the acumen to review these things. What we're finding nowadays is that, a scholar says something and the common people are reacting as if they themselves are more of a scholar than the scholar himself. So this is not fair because anyone can be a scholar, yes, but then you need to do the groundwork. You go through the period of learning, you acquire the basics, and then you understand the discourse at a certain level. Otherwise, if you just take a scholar's pronouncement and you don't see how he got there, it's almost like my math teacher. I remember the math teacher was not so much interested in the final answer, but was interested in the method. And she gave marks for the method, even if your answer was wrong, because maybe you made a miscalculation, you arrived at a wrong answer, but your method shows that you have an understanding and a grasp of the subject. Mm-hmm. So the scholar has the method, the grasp of the subject, even though the scholar may err in the final pronouncement. And what happens is that the common folks look at the final pronouncement and say, oh, this is different from what we ever heard, so this can't be true. But what they need to do is to engage with the method to see if the scholar has been following dutifully a proper method of looking at what the Quran says, looking at what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said on the question, looking at the question as to whether the statement that is reported of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is really authentic, or perhaps some narrator made a mistake in reporting this or something like this. So in looking at that method, then we can see whether this person is really following his or her desires, just simply to arrive at a predetermined conclusion that he likes or she likes, or whether they're using proper methodology and letting that method dictate what the conclusion is going to be. Mm-hmm. And so we don't reject the statement because of the conclusion. We want to see the method.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Shabir, is there a definitive body of scholars, for example, who can come and say, this individual is beyond the fold of Islam? They're not a Muslim anymore because of their beliefs?
And there isn't one definitive body. There can be many definitive, but there can be, let's say one scholar speaks. People may say, okay, I heard the scholar say something. It sounds unconventional. What are other scholars saying about this? So we want to know what other scholars say. Now, let's say a number of scholars form a body that responds to questions and so on. They give what is referred to as fatwa. They give Islamic verdicts. So the larger this body, the more confidence we'll have in this body, as opposed to looking at a lone scholar, because it's easier for the lone scholar to arrive at an erroneous conclusion. And with the large body of scholarship, we expect there's going to be a lot of internal debate and discussion. They will sort things out. It gives us more confidence. But it so happens that presently in the Islamic world, there are many different bodies. And of course, there are sects within the Islamic faith. There is Sunni on the one hand, Shi'i on the other, and each will have their own legislative bodies. So among Sunnis, which I know a little bit more about because I'm, adhering to that larger tradition, we find that there are many different bodies of scholarship. For example, there is a body of scholarship in Saudi Arabia that gives rulings. And many people simplistically think that because of their location and because of their facility with the Arabic language and so on, that must be the body that we must follow. But somebody else may say, well, wait a minute, that body seems to be following mainly a literalist type of interpretation of the faith. I have more confidence in a body that will look at more of the rationale behind things and maybe give different rulings as a result. So they might pick a different body, maybe a body that is located in Egypt or in some other part of the world. So there are more than one bodies, and Muslims are free to choose one or the other. And it does not help Muslims to say, well, my scholars are the only ones, because that is like to turn a blind eye to the reality around us. It's like some people thinking, even if there is a joke about some people in paradise, and and they come to a wall, and they ask, why is this wall? And they're told, well, on the other side of the wall are the people that you don't like.
In paradise.
In paradise, yeah. So, some people have such a narrow view that it's as if the paradise is reserved for them and the scholarship that they trust. And everybody else who do not follow this must be somewhere else. And even if they're in paradise, we don't want to see them, because it's going to be distressing for them to see other people in paradise, because they're living their whole lives telling other people, like, we are the only ones who are going there. So for them to see other people there, it's going to be a shocker. But we know that the grace of God is vast, and God didn't create the paradise just for a few people. It's bigger than we can imagine, and God's grace is all encompassing. God does not benefit from punishing people in hell, but God's mercy is overflowing, and he wants that mercy to extend towards people. And the expression of his mercy is paradise. He wants people to go to paradise.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Very interesting. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe. And please donate to support our work at QuranSpeaks.com.